ahead and minimize this. Hi, everybody. Okay. Hi, Jeannie. Hi, Ashley. Hi, Kat. Hey, BB. Hey, Zoe. Oh, I do it every time. I can hear myself again. No, no, no. Okay. Um, so what we're doing, let me get over to the place I need to be. I won't be able to see your chat comments, but you're welcome to make all the comments you want. But when we're done with what we're going to do, we'll have a Q&A time. But comments are welcome the whole thing. I just won't see your questions, okay? So what this is, it's a newly released late April, mid-April from a document from the University of Wisconsin Law School, and it's a legal studies research paper series, paper number 1473. It's called Under the Hood, Brendan Dassey, Language Impairments and Judicial Ignorance. So it's about the study of the language impairments that Brendan Dassey had and other impairments, and how the judicial ignorance um, cost him a wrongful conviction. And it's very good. It's by Michele, and I know I'm saying this wrong, but I'm gonna say LaVigne and Sally Miles. And you can download this paper here, as well as we have it in the description below. I'm pointing below the video. So you can grab it there. That'll take you to the RD library. You do have to have a Microsoft password to get in, but if you don't have one, it takes 2 seconds to sign up. It's just Microsoft. So anyway, that's your library card. You can get in and then do that. But let's go back. I could be talking to myself. Let's make sure we have sound. Hey, everybody. Can everyone hear me? Can I get a yes, please? Oh, I hope you guys can hear me. Okay, let me turn up a little bit. Yes, awesome. Thank you guys. I know we do have a delay in YouTube, so I always have to like wait. Okay. Now let's do a visual check real quick. Oh, I can see the visual check. Okay. Um BB and Zoe and everybody, well, actually mostly BB. She's going to be posting links for you if you want to do a read along on this document, this research they're doing. BB has posted the link for you that you can just click. It should open a new window, so you'll still have the chat open and you can hear us, and then you can also read along. So we welcome that. Now, this is a cold read. I have scanned the document pretty good to know a little bit. What it's doing is it's researching the language impairments that Brendan experienced and other deficits that arose from that. Not only did he not understand what was being said to him, he also doesn't have good communication skills or understand what the words actually imply. Okay, what the power is. He doesn't understand the power behind words whatsoever. And so we're going to be reading through this document pretty much straight through. Now, before we get rolling, I want to give a shout out to Jax, because if it weren't for her, we wouldn't have this document. So on one of her Facebook sites, Jack West, her people have listed this, one of the posters listed this document and shared it in the middle of the night. It's received a few likes and such, but I don't think that a lot of people are noticing how important and valuable this document is. So we want to do a personal thank you to Jax West for providing such great foundation and platform for public awareness, that people can just drop in the middle of the night, leave a breadcrumb like this. And thank you for that dedicated person that was researching the case on their own and found this document and shared. Now, I can't say their name because I don't have permission, but they know who they are. If they do send me the name, I will add a thank you in the bottom of the description of the video, because we would greatly like to include them in their hard work to say thank you. And then second, just kind of ironic, Eric Cozy and I apparently share the same birthday. So happy belated birthday, Eric Cozy. I appreciate sharing the same day with you. So, okay, you guys, I think, we've only got 19 in the seats, but this is going to be uploaded. So a lot of people will be able to watch this. I appreciate you guys showing up for this. I know a lot of people work. So for those of you that are going to be viewing this later, I thank you also for your time and, you know, digging in a little bit. This is going to be an intense read, to be honest. And it's kind of emotional when you think of this young kid, 16 years old, language impairment, not understanding how to communicate well, and also not understanding a lot of what the words mean that are being told to him in the order they're being told. So, in other words, when he's being told something, he takes a longer time to digest what's being said. And he also needs help at times. And that's why he has an IEP team, which is an individual education program. And the reason a child would have an IEP team is a translating system that analyzes. So the guidance council and the teachers gather in a group. They assess this child to see if this child measures up to where he should be at his level. Now, if the child falls mildly below his level, they'll just ask the teachers to work with them. But if the child falls significantly below what they expect the child to be at, they will introduce invitation to the parents to ask if they can form an IEP team that will personally assist this child throughout their entire high school lifetime. And what they do is they figure out what the child's weaknesses and strengths are. And when they get to the weaknesses, they will pull them out of the mainstream class and they will try to one-on-one or a smaller group work with the child to bring them up to the current level they expect. And so when you're working with a child that has specifically a language deficit or impairment, it's crucial that an adult that is well versed in that particular child's stage be present, whether it be the parent, the guidance counselor, or one of the IEP team. Now, what's interesting is Brendan's one of his main interviews is at the school. I'm going to let you chew on that, okay? All right. Can I get a little hello just so I make sure I know that we're totally connected and I haven't fallen offline? um, yeah, it's going to be it's a good hour here of the live that we're going to have. So, let me just go back and check something. It's showing I'm live, so I'm hoping that we are. Okay. Mine just got really slack and all of a sudden it froze. Oh, beautiful. Hello, everyone. Hi, Lyra. Hi, Paul. Hi, Bella. Hi, Eddie. Ah, Eddie's from Wisconsin. Hey, I feel you, bro. I feel you. BB and I are from Wisconsin as well. Yeah. Okay, guys. So, are you ready for this? So, I will make a mention. This is going to be a straight through read with an intermission halfway because it's about an hour's read. I will ask that you converse and comment to your heart's delight. But if you have a question you'd like an answer to, I can't see the screen because I'm showing you my screen, which is what we read. And so what I would ask, because I would love to have a discussion with you, we're going to have a two-part discussion following this. We're going to do question answers after, or I should say following the read. And then also for those of you that want to join us on Discord, BB is posting on there. Hey, Julie's from Wisconsin. That's crazy. Paul's from Belgium. That's awesome. Wow. Yeah, this case reaches around the world 24/7. It truly does. Come on, Gretchen. You know I'm doing a live, so here comes Gretchen, the puppy. Come here, baby. Yeah, you no fussing. No fussing now. Okay, guys. Michigan. Hey, Ashley. Woo, woo. British Columbia. We'll get a couple of these out there. This is this is how wonderful this public awareness platform is. You know, there's not only YouTube, there's Facebook. A lot of people have asked me if I would ever do Facebook. We're considering it. We're also in the process of negotiating with Amazon on getting some ebooks out there for more public awareness. And so you won't be able to buy the book. You would actually need a subscription to Kindle, and they can just check it out of the library. We just figured that'd be a lot easier for everybody. So that's something coming up. Um, Northern Ireland, Indiana, woo, Bella, and Northern Ireland for Lyra. Yep, all over the world. Okay, guys, it's time to dig in. And hopefully I can do this. I do have a cold still. It was bronchitis. It's now just a chest cold, so we've got improvement. So please bear with me if I sound like I have a cold. Okay. This document is put out by the University of Wisconsin Law School. Legal Studies Research Paper, Series Paper number 1473. And like I said, BB's posting the link as well as in the description of the video itself. It's entitled Under the Hood, Brendan Dassey, Language Impairments and Judicial Ignorance. And it was written by Michele Le, I don't want to say it. I'm going to say it wrong. Vigne and Sally Miles. Forgive me if I've done your name injustice. Maya's snoring so bad. Maya, my dog. This paper can be downloaded without charge from the Social Science Research Network electronic paper collection and there's the link. We've left the link in our link so that you can go directly to their site if you choose. It was the Under the Hood Brendan Dassey. The release date was 4/29/2019 at 6:40 p.m. So this is a newly released work of research work, and we begin our read. Under the Hood, Brendan Dassey, Language Impairments and Judicial Ignorance. Michele LaVigne, Sally Miles. Introduction, Making a Murderer. The 2015 Netflix documentary Making a Murderer was a worldwide sensation. The 10-part series told the story of Stephen Avery of Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and his nephew Brendan Dassey, who were convicted of a gruesome 2006 homicide of Teresa Halbach. The series raised serious questions about whether the two were actually guilty or the victims of law enforcement malfeasance. Viewers were divided on Avery, with as many saying he was guilty as not guilty. Viewers were not nearly as divided, however, about Avery's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey. Brendan was a developmentally delayed special education student whose treatment by all parts of the criminal justice system, including his own attorney, was at best an embarrassment and at worst the direct cause of a grotesque, wrongful conviction. For many, the most disturbing aspect was the footage of eager law enforcement extracting a confession from Brendan in ways that were both comical and cynical. One commentator likened the interrogation to training a new puppy. The most memorable part of the interrogation came when, when investigators harangued Brendan about what was done to Miss Halbach's head. Brendan proceeded to guess, cut off her hair, punch her, cut her throat. When he said he could not remember anything else, despite investigators' insistence, they blurted out, "All right, I'm just gonna come out and ask you, who shot her in the head?" Brendan replied, "He, Avery did." When asked why he had not told them, Brendan said, "'cause I couldn't think of it." Later, after Brendan had, quote, confessed to raping and killing Miss Halbach, he asked if he could return to school because he had a project due 6 hours. Not surprisingly, the fullest statement is filled with contradictions and physical impossibilities. Nevertheless, law enforcement cobbled together enough of a confession to form the basis of a charge that Brendan had assisted Stephen Avery in killing Miss Halbach. Despite glaring overreach by law enforcement, the series only captured a minuscule fraction. The trial court found that Brendan's confession was voluntary, and it was admitted as the primary piece of evidence in his trial. He was convicted as a party to homicide and sentenced to life imprisonment. The voluntariness of Brendan's confession was a primary issue in an unsuccessful state appeal and federal habeas corpus action. Brendan continues to serve a life sentence. The co-authors watched Making a Murderer with both personal and professional interest. Of course, we were taken by the drama, though we knew the outcome for Avery and Dassey long before the show ever appeared. But we were particularly intrigued by the interrogation of Brendan Dassey. More specifically, we were curious about the aspects of the. We both have professional interest in language impairments, i.e., defects in language and language usage. We are well aware that despite the innocuous name, language impairments can be serious disabilities and with potentially catastrophic, I can't say the word, catastrophic effects. Sorry, guys. We are also aware that individuals with language impairments are subsequently overrepresented in the criminal and juvenile justice systems. Though the documentary never came out and said that Brendan had a language impairment, throughout the program and the criminal case itself, there are references to Brendan's intellectual defects and borderline IQ, but there are few specifics. We were fairly certain he did, and if he did, we were certain it would have had a profound effect on the interrogation. Our first step was an easy outline search of court records, where we found documentation that Brendan did indeed have a severe language-based specific learning disability and multifaceted language impairment that placed his communication and processing skills in the lowest percentiles of all juveniles his age. Brendan's brutally low scores, which one expert termed appalling, inspired us to undertake a closer look at the language of the interrogations. With the assistance of a language transcription company, we conducted a thorough qualitative and quantitative analysis of the communication and language of the complete interrogation. We took a deep look under the hood, examining the volume and structure as well as the content of what was said by both Brendan and law enforcement. We quickly concluded that the interviewing technique utilized by law enforcement was a chaotic, unprofessional mess. Almost everything the two officers did in the course of interrogating Brendan violated the most minimal standards for interviewing any juvenile, but especially one with underdeveloped language and communication skills. They inundated him with verbiage, continuously asking multiple questions within a single turn, spoken paragraphs, changed topics in the middle of oration, asked hundreds of leading questions, implanted content thousands of times. By the time we finished our review, we were and are confident that the verbal behavior of law enforcement throughout the interrogations of Brendan, coupled with his poor ability to linguistically cope and his age, made him a prime candidate for unwillingly and unwittingly confessing to a crime he did not commit. Our analysis has little in common with the voluntariness ruling by the trial court. That ruling demonstrated a remarkable ignorance of how humans communicate in general, let alone the special issues presented by someone like Brendan Dassey. The decision instead of closely parsed apparent promises of leniency to show that they were not actually promises of leniency, and noted that law enforcement did not yell and allow Brendan to sit on a soft couch. The decision even suggested that Brendan was not really a special education student because part of his school day was spent in regular track high school classes. Tragically, this decision was the foundation for a long legal journey that ended in June 2018 with the denial of certiorari by the U.S. Supreme Court. Admittedly, nobody else involved in the case seemed to know much about communication or Brendan's impairments either. Not law enforcement, not even his own pretrial attorney. A record of Brendan's language disability and its significance was never developed during the pretrial hearings, although counsel possessed the testing results. Of course, in order to remain so oblivious, all parties must have completely disregarded the records that laid out Brendan's defects in the plainest of terms. And they must have been blind to the behavioral and verbal cues that Brendan would have provided any time they met. This article describes our under the hood analysis of the interrogations of Brendan Dassey and explains why we believe that reckless and amateurish behavior of law enforcement in the face of Brendan's communication defects directly contributed to an involuntary and utterly unreliable confession. We are hardly alone in thinking that the confession violates the most basic standards of common decency and due process, and that even with the existing record, it never should have been admitted at trial. Our analysis simply provides another layer. You could say that this is our fantasy attempt to supplement the record. I'll bet a decade later. This is also our attempt to proselytize about language impairments and their insidious effects. All right, guys, I'm going to pause here for a moment. We're going to go back to live. I'm just going to make sure we're still broadcasting. Let me catch up here. Is everybody following along okay? I'm just doing a check to make sure we're still rolling good. And I need a little drink because of the cold. Okay, thank you, guys. I'm doing my best, you guys. I'm sorry I'm stuffed up and stuttering a little bit. It's emotional too. Kind of tightens up my throat a little bit when I'm reading this. So we'll keep going. All right, and shall we continue? You know, I forgot to turn the phone off, so let's do that real quick. And we'll just hold the power button a minute. We'll just put it on airplane mode. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. Our approach is interdisciplinary and informed by our experiences and research in two different fields, law and speech language pathology. While the legal community in the United States is just beginning to notice the speech language profession, we have found that law and speech language pathology are a natural fit. Co-author Dr. Sally Mild's clinical and research expertise in the field of speech language pathology has allowed us to collect and analyze language data in ways not usually found in law. She has also provided clinical observations along with expert opinions of the type that a lawyer would rely on both in and out of court. This article will not rehash or reframe the material covered in the pleadings filed in state and federal court on Brendan's behalf. Those motions and supporting beliefs did a masterful job of describing the myriad ways that law enforcement unambiguously fed Brendan, a child, specifically incriminating details, promised leniency, and repeatedly lied about their superior knowledge. Here, the focus is not so much on what was said by law enforcement, but how it was said, and why how it was said would prey on the very specific weakness of someone like Brendan. We provide examples throughout our analysis and discussion, but readers are encouraged to listen to the recordings of the interrogations to get the full flavor. This article is foundation heavy. We spend considerable time talking about language impairments in general and the science of interviewing. This type of background information is necessary for our analysis to make any sense. Then we turn to the case. First, we discuss we learned about Brendan's language impairments from his school records, all in the court record, and what they tell us about his communicative, my problem, ability to cope with an interrogation. Then we move on to our qualitative and quantitative analysis of the interviews interrogations. We certainly looked at Brendan's verbal and nonverbal conduct, but as the discussion reflects, we ended up paying more attention to law enforcement's verbal and nonverbal conduct because it was so much more remarkable, and not in a good way. Finally, we return to the court's decisions. The trial court and the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in blanc majority to show how courts completely missed the realities of Brendan's impairments and the erogenous of the interviewing technique used by law enforcement. There will be no happy ending to this article. As Judge Ilana Rovner said in her scathing dissent to the Seventh Circuit in Blanca decision, this is a profound miscarriage of justice. The best we can hope is that the knowledge and principles we have applied can inform other cases. There are countless Brendan Dasseys at the receiving end of the criminal justice system, and they all deserve justice. Before we start, I'm going to pause it for just a minute. We're going to go take just a 2-minute window of a break to let that kind of sink in. And then we're going to start with the first part of the Albany Law Review. All right, guys. Something I just thought of when I was talking to LL Grace on the chat. So many of us keep the Avery case in its place and we separate it from our everyday life. So, um, as BB calls it, we have our murder friends where we investigate the murder, or we also have our normal life. And I think this can be shared in our normal life. And I think we need to get it out there on our Facebooks if we can, or our Twitters. So if you can combine that as an effort, you're just pushing that public awareness out there in so many more ways. You have no idea who's going to see it and share it with 1,000 people. So I appreciate all you guys' hard work. And with that, let's start reading. So this is the Albany Law Review. 1. State of Wisconsin versus Brendan Dassey. Teresa Halbach of northeastern Wisconsin went missing on October 31st, 2005. She was last seen on the property of Stephen Avery of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Within 2 weeks, it was determined that she had been murdered and her body mutilated. Miss Halbach's remains were found on Avery's property. From the beginning, Avery was a prime suspect. On November 5th, Avery's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey, who lived with his family down the road from Avery, was interviewed by law enforcement from neighboring Marinette County. Law enforcement was attempting to find out whether Brendan had seen Miss Halbach on Avery's property. Avery was officially charged with the crime on November 15th, 2005. In February 2006, law enforcement was alerted to the fact that Brendan had been acting strangely and had been seen on Avery's property on October 31st. On February 27th, Brendan was interviewed by Calumet County Sheriff's investigator Mark Wiegert and Wisconsin Department of Justice Special Agent Tom Fassbender. Wiegert and Fassbender. He was questioned twice with his mother's consent, once at school and then at the local police station. On March 1st, Wiegert and Fassbender met Brendan at school and told him they wanted to, quote, interview him some more at the local police station, again with his mother's permission. After a torturous process, Brendan began to affirm or provide a series of incriminating details, which formed the basis of a, quote, confession. Based on this confession to Wiegert and Fassbender, Brendan was charged as a party to the crime of homicide. The confession was the primary evidence against him. Pretrial counsel Lynn Kaczynski filed a motion to suppress on the grounds that Brendan's statement was not voluntary. The school psychologist testified that Brendan has documented cognitive and learning defects. After hearing the testimony and watching a recording of March 1st interrogation, the court denied the motion, finding that the confession was voluntary. In its decision, the court made 12 findings and facts about Brendan's behavior and characteristics in law enforcement conduct. As will be discussed in Part 8, in these findings and the resulting conclusions of law, the trial court demonstrated little awareness of the subtleties of Brendan's communication, developmental, and cognitive issues, even less awareness of the subtleties of Wiegert and Fassbender's communication, and absolutely no recognition of how the combination would have affected the interrogation. Brendan went to trial. Trial counsel sought to show that Brendan's confession was unreliable and inherently false. Inherently false. Again, the school psychologist testified and did an expert on suggestibility. Brendan himself testified, haplessly trying to explain how he came to a confession to a crime he said he did not commit. The jury convicted him. On appeal, the central issue was voluntariness of Brendan's confession to Wiegert and Fassbender. Appellate counsel first proceeded under a Wisconsin post-conviction statute that allows a defendant to return to the trial court to supplement the record before proceeding with an appeal. At the hearing on the post-conviction motion, counsel presented Dr. Richard Leo, who testified at length regarding the science of false confessions. Dr. Leo also testified about Wiegert and Fassbinder's coercive techniques and Brendan's vulnerability to those techniques because of his age and intellectual limitations. A central point of contention was the number of times that Wiegert and Fassbinder contaminated the interview by directly feeding facts, which were then parroted back by Brendan. The motion was denied. The court reaffirmed its original findings and bolstered those findings with the strength of the case. The Wisconsin Court of Appeals affirmed the trial court ruling in a short 23-paragraph opinion. In the brief 2 paragraphs that analyzed the circumstances of the interrogation and confession, the court adopted the trial court's findings wholesale. The trial court heard the testimony of Dassey's mother, his school psychologist, and the police interviewer, and had the benefit of listening to the audio tapes and viewing the videotaped interviews. The trial court found that Dassey had a low, average to borderline IQ, but was in mostly regular track high school classes, was interviewed while seated on an upholstered couch, never was physically restrained, and was offered food, beverages, and restroom breaks, which was properly Mirandized, and did not appear to be agitated or intimidated at any point in the questioning. The court also found that the investigators used normal speaking tones with no hectoring threats or promises of leniency, prodded him to be honest as a reminder of his moral duty to tell the truth, and told him they were in his corner and would go to bat for him to try to achieve a rapport with Dassey and to convince him that being truthful would be in his best interest. The court concluded that Dassey's confession was voluntary and admissible. The trial court's findings are not clearly erroneous. The Wisconsin Supreme Court declined to take review. Attorneys then filed a petition for habeas corpus in the Eastern District of Wisconsin. In a lengthy opinion, Magistrate Judge Duffin examined the confession in light of the conduct of Wiegert and Fassbinder and their, quote, highly leading questions. The court acknowledged significant doubts as to the reliability of Dassey's confession, but also acknowledged that a constitutional matter reliability is for the jury, not the court ruling on voluntariness. The court went on, however, to find that looking at the totality of the circumstances, including Brendan's age, lack of familiarity with the criminal justice system, lack of parent present, Wiegert and Fassbinder's paternalistic and exploitative behavior and promises of leniency, Brendan's confession was involuntary and the case was reprimanded. A divided 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit affirmed that ruling. The decision was subsequently reversed by an en blanc panel of the Court of Appeals in December 2017. And the 4-3 decision of the court found that, despite its relative brevity, the State Court of Appeals' terse 2-paragraph endorsement of the trial court findings was sufficient to satisfy the reasonableness standard of 28 U.S.C. 2254, and that the federal courts were therefore required to defer the state court findings. There were 2 strongly worded dissents. The first, by Chief Judge Diane Wood, began. Under the hood, Brendan Dassey. Psychological coercion, questions to which the police furnished the answers, and ghoulish games of 20 questions in which Brendan Dassey guessed over and over again before he landed the correct story, the one the police wanted, led the confession that furnished the only serious evidence supporting this murder conviction in the Wisconsin courts. The Supreme Court denied certiorari on June 25, 2018. Why a speech language pathologist? An unusual feature of this project is that it pairs a law professor with a speech language pathologist, an SLP, a profession not commonly seen or well understood in the criminal or juvenile justice systems. While it is fairly well known that SLPs are the professionals who work with children who have difficulties with S's, L's, R's, or who stutter, people unfamiliar with the field may be surprised at the full breadth of SLP's professional activities, expertise, and services. The full scope of the practice includes all aspects of communication across the full lifespan from infants, toddlers, preschool, and school-age children and adolescents to adults of all ages. Language development and disorders have long been primary areas of expertise for SLPs, and no other profession holds this expertise. SLPs work predominantly with clients who have delays or disorders, many of which occur, as with Brendan, developmentally, not the result of illness or trauma. SLPs provide screening and disclosure analysis for identify potential communication problems, full-scale evaluation and diagnosis, intervention therapy services, counseling, and education for clients and their families, educators, and other providers. In other words, an SLP is well suited for involvement in criminal cases where a juvenile or adult has a suspected or already diagnosed language defect. Just like Sherlock Holmes, a good SLP's business is to know what other people don't know and to observe what others cannot see. A good SLP will see under the surface into the underlying interconnected complexities of the communication and cognitive systems and understand the significance of developmental processes. Seeing beneath the surface is especially important in this case because because so much was decided or overlooked based on the appearance of things. Brendan appeared to be functioning well in the interview. He appeared to understand. He appeared to agree to so much of what the police said. The police appeared to be calm, appeared to be gentle, appeared to be just asking the kid some questions as he sat comfortable on a comfortable couch. No one bothered to go under the hood because they thought they knew. They thought they could rely on common sense, but they did not recognize their own ignorance. They clearly did not know that their common sense would not serve in this situation. Once again, Sherlock says it best. You did not know where to look, and so you missed all that was important. Unlike many forensic psychologists who address mental and behavioral functioning, an SLP is trained to go beyond generalities about communication problems and can correct the kind of misconceptions that occur in this case. An SLP can provide a detailed description of the defects, whether it is processing verbal memory or narrative, and what those defects mean in actual communication situations. The SLP can offer insights about an individual's nonverbal communication and the connection between the individual's language defects and behavior. Equally important, the SLP can analyze the communication of other persons who interact with impaired individual. This can be critical when, as here, the verbal and nonverbal communication of the other people in the conversation, i.e. law enforcement, matters as much as the communication of the impaired person. Part 3, Language Impairments, a Primer. That Brendan had a severe language impairment that profoundly interfered with his functioning is incontrovertible. Unfortunately, few people in the Manitowoc County Courthouse seem to have even noticed. To be fair, Manitowoc is hardly unique. We therefore feel that an overview of language impairments is in order before turning to Brendan. A. Language impairments. What are they? Language is an organized system governed by rules and conventions that speakers follow without knowing it. Language is a powerful tool comprised of 3 large domains: form, meaning, and use. It has a significant nonverbal dimension and integrates cognitive systems with such as attention, memory, problem solving, executive functioning, and social emotional skills. Despite all of its power, however, the process of acquiring language in early childhood can be easily disrupted by a number of oh, physi- physiological, psychological, and environmental forces. When that happens, the resulting impairment can be devastating and lifelong. The term language impairment, also known as language disorder, generally refers to deficiencies in language competency. It encompasses weakness in three realms of spoken language: expressive, receptive, and pragmatic. Expressive and receptive comprehension defects affect vocabulary, syntax, semantics, and processing. These skills are directly related to the ability to decipher meaning and to adequately recall and relate information. According to the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists in UK, lack of these vital communication skills results in poor knowledge, processing, and application of culturally relevant and often quite subtle behavior that assist in establishing and maintaining relationships at varying degrees of complexity. Pragmatic defects relate to the behavioral effects of communication. Deficiencies in this aspect of language reveal themselves in a lack of social cognition, an inability to take the perspective of the other person, and a failure to appropriately adapt in interactions. Individuals with pragmatic issues often lack, quote, the ability to accurately process a face to face interaction and have difficulty processing nonverbal content as well as verbal content. Develop, Developmental language impairments are the result of disruption in a child's language acquisition process. The causes can be underlying communication disorder, such as hearing loss, auditory processing disorder, an underlying cognitive defect, or external conditions such as extreme poverty, trauma, abuse, or neglect. Language impairments will also co occur with associated disorders such as ADHD, learning disability, and pervasive developmental disorder. Language impairments rarely exist in isolation. Because language is so essential to human functioning, communication defects invariably give rise to cognitive, social, academic, behavioral, and or emotional difficulties. Any one of these can have a profound influence on an individual's ability to effectively navigate through life, even after the individual has acquired enough language to get by in daily living or to appear normal. In fact, although language impairment is often classified as a childhood disorder, a child does not outgrow it. The effects and defects will typically continue on into late adolescent and adulthood. It should come as no surprise that people with language impairments do not fare well in the criminal or juvenile justice systems. In a previous article, co-author Michele LaVigne, I hope I'm doing that right, described many collateral consequences of language impairment that impede or even destroy an individual's ability to receive due process and and effectively participate in the criminal justice system, whether it be working with counsel or facing a high stakes interrogation. The list is long: poor vocabulary, difficulty processing complex sentences and paragraphs, length utterances, deficient auditory memory, poor narrative skills, inability to grasp interferences, lack of background knowledge, difficulty learning new material, and limited ability to seek clarification. This is not to suggest that every person with a language impairment will be disabled or disadvantaged in all aspects of communication, nor will the defects necessarily be readily apparent or recognizable, as will be discussed below. Nevertheless, there is no question that language impairments or disorders can and do strike directly at the heart of justice for the impaired individuals who come into juvenile or criminal court. The effects of language impairments take on even greater urgency when we consider that individuals with language impairments are arrested, convicted, and incarcerated at rates well beyond the impairment rates found in the general population. Language impairments occur in approximately 7% of the population, but studies of juvenile adult correctional facilities in the United States and UK have found rates of language impairment that are 3 to 10 times higher. British researchers have estimated that 50 to 60 of percent of young offenders 21 or younger have speech, language, and communication needs. Two studies of adolescent boys charged with homicidal behavior, attempted or completed homicides in New York and Florida, found that every one of them had a diagnosable language disorder and all scored well below their actual ages in language measures. Why don't we know this? Part C. So, if language impairments can be so devastating to human development and have the potential to wreak havoc on due process, and if so many of the people who cycle through a criminal and juvenile justice systems have these impairments, why don't we know about this? Okay, guys, I need to get a drink. I can feel I'm going to cough soon. So we're going to take a 2 minute um, little reprieve. I'll grab a drink and we'll come right back. I'm going to mark it right here so we know where we left off. And I'll come in and see how you guys are doing. All right, guys, let's get back into our read. I got a little cough drop, so it should help us. Why are language impairments not common knowledge among criminal and juvenile law professionals? And in the context of Brendan's case, why did the police pretrial counsel and the judge not know that he suffered from a severe multifaceted language impairment that reached the level of disability? Especially when the documentation of the impairment was right in front of their faces. That, as they say, is the $1,000,000 question. And as it's true for so many high priced questions, the answer is complicated. The legal profession is not alone in its ignorance of language impairments. Despite decades of robust research, language impairments still remain relatively unknown outside of the speech language profession, especially in the United States. And despite the fact that language impairments occur more frequently than other well known disorders, there's little public awareness. Stop right there. Okay, you guys, that's your answer. We think everybody knows, so we're not sharing it. I need you guys to do, I don't care how you share this document, please share this document. We've got to get this out there. This is imperative. And back to the read. A common refrain among speech language professionals is that language impairments are the most common childhood disorder the public never heard of. One of the primary reasons for this anonymity is that language impairments are hidden. Unless an individual also has an articulation speech production disorder, language impairment will often not look like anything we recognize as a disorder. Instead, the impaired individual may appear as a person of few words or odd words, and this may be accompanied by excessive passive 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 I can't even say that word passivity. There we go. Reluctance or bruteness, which will simply be written off as personality traits, or in many instances as a behavior problem. Meanwhile, an impaired child grows into an adolescent and adulthood. He or she will learn to pass, quote unquote, by developing techniques for masking communication defects. It is also likely that the general public and the legal profession never paid attention to language impairments because we never had to. For most of us, especially the verbal types drawn to law, language simply showed up. Language is a linguist, Noam Chomsky, put it, quote, something that happens to you, it's not something you do. But while that may make our lack of awareness understandable, it does not mitigate the harm caused by that ignorance. Section 4, the science of interviewing. Another area of profound ignorance among the players in Brendan's case was the science of interviewing. From looking at the record, it appears that law enforcement, pretrial counsel, and the judge knew that open ended questions were good and leading questions were bad, but they had courtroom notions of open ended and leading questions. Beyond that, no one seemed to appreciate the complicated dynamics of interviewing, especially an adolescent with severe language disability. The lack of understanding followed Brendan up through the In Blanca panel in Chicago and played a major role in the way the case turned out. For that reason, we believe that an overview of interviewing principles is as essential as discussion of language impairments. Subsection A, General Principles and Best Practices. Interviewing is a multifaceted subject that commands its own graduate level courses. As we will discuss below, decades of research have produced consensus about best practices for interviewing an impaired juvenile like Brendan, or for that matter, anybody. When we analyzed the interviews with Brendan, we did so through the lens of those best practices. Interviewing is sophisticated, complicated business that requires specialized training, knowledge, practice, and ongoing review and assessment. The interview is a critical tool for professionals in a number of fields: medical, therapeutic, clinical, and forensic, all of which recognize that a well done interview is essential to case success and that a poorly done interview is a recipe for disaster. Extensive research has resulted in recommendations for evidence based best practices that are similar across professions, including law enforcement. These practices reflect the recognition that behavior, and language have a direct effect on the interviewee's language and thus on quality of the information provided. Experts have identified verbal behaviors that explicit the most accurate and complete content possible on the one hand, and on the other, behaviors to be avoided because they are contaminating, suggestive, and or narrow the interviewer's focus too early in the process. When the person being interviewed is a child or an individual with any kind of cognitive or developmental delay, the need for best practices becomes even more urgent. Because of their underdeveloped language skills, these individuals are at greater risk for providing inaccurate information in response to memory cues or prompts. This, coupled with well-documented desire to say what they think the interviewer wants to hear, makes interviews with individuals both high risk and high stakes. The risk is further complicated by the malleable nature of memory, i.e., memories can be updated each time they are accessed. If memories are repeatedly accessed by inappropriate or carelessly executed verbal prompts, they can easily be corrupted. They can be easily corrupted. The first step to an accurate interview with any type of vulnerable individual happens before the interview ever starts. Pre interview preparation and information gathering about the person to be interviewed are imperative. Speaking with teachers or parents and accessing records inform the interviewer about potential conditions that may affect participation in an interview. The interview itself is ideally conducted as soon as possible after the event, and in a distraction free, comfortable environment, the interviewer begins by establishing genuine rapport. The next phase, known as information elicitation, is the heart of the interview. This is the place where adherence to the evidence based procedure is essential. Interviewers conducted systematically, adhering to the procedure and with an understanding of language use and its reciprocal. Oh boy, this is all language and I'm stuttering. Reciprocal nature produce information that is substantially more reliable and complete. One of the keys to a good interview is the interviewer's understanding of the kind of communication she should aim for, both from herself and the person being interviewed. In an information seeking interview, the interviewer's role is to encourage the interviewee to provide information in the form of freely recalled narratives. A narrative is an account of events occurring over time. Minimally, a narrative can take the form of a single complex sentence or several simple consecutive utterances. A narrative that is freely recalled unfolds in the most unbiased, uninfluenced way possible. It is not suggested or directed by another person. The person who experienced it tells the story. As would be expected, questions are the tools of the professional interviewer, but not all questions are created equal. Interviewers need awareness of the characteristics of questions and how to sequence them. Certain questions or the repeated use of particular type of questions may have effects that the interviewer does not intend, such as introducing inaccuracies or omitting important content. Experts universally agree that open-ended questions are the best tool for eliciting narrative. Open-ended questions consist of little or no content and carry the least risk of contamination. They may indicate a general topic or time period, as in, tell me what happened. Tell me what happened on X date or at X place is not important. It is important to note that these open-ended questions are not the same as the questions the lawyers and judges typically think of as open-ended. Open-ended questions should be used to start the interview and should continue as the most used question throughout. The value and utility of these questions may not be readily apparent precisely because they contain so little content. However, quote, as soon as the first narrative is completed, the interviewer has obtained freely generated material, and the interviewer can ask for elaboration by using follow-up open-ended questions such as, tell me more about X, what the child said. When open-ended questions are exhausted, other questions containing more content can be used, such as what questions. What questions are formulated using the words who, what, where, etc. These questions have a narrow focus, such as a location or a person's name, and can, if misplaced or overused, unintentionally elicit restricted and abbreviated responses. On the other hand, these questions are useful as follow-up. Yes-no questions are yes-no questions of all question types contain the most content and carry the greatest risk of introducing content that the interviewee has not mentioned. Generally speaking, yes-no questions contain all the content that a declarative sentence contains. For example, did you go home after school? Contains the same content as a statement, you went home after school, and adds a demand for confirmation or denial. Multiple choice questions are never acceptable, ever. They are problematic for a number of reasons, and there is no productivity use for these. The interviewee may interpret these as a forced choice, even if none of the above is the correct answer, or may select an inaccurate choice because they want to please the interviewer. Okay, have you guys been hearing me read? Because I think my mic was off. I hope not. I'm double checking. I try to check all the time, but I do shut it off when I cough. So we'll ask. I hope I didn't have radio air silence. It'll be nice when I'm over this little cough. Okay, thank you, Lyra. We'll head right back in. Okay, like I said, I did take a little cough medicine, so bear with me. So we talked about the multiple choice and how, um, there we are. A visual representation of ideal proportions of question type and sequence would look something like a food pyramid, with open-ended questions, the fruits and vegetables, leading the sequence and taking up almost two-thirds. Notice that yes-no questions are barely used, and there is no room whatsoever for multiple choice questions. So you can see here, you guys, this is the best practice, and at the very top is the darkest, and it's the um, who, the what. That's where your top of the questions are. And then the next one is yes, no. And the next one is open-ended. I wish it was in color for you guys, but it's not. Sorry. And continuing to read. Throughout the process, the interviewer must engage in a process of double awareness. Obviously, the interviewer should be looking for signs of confusion or discomfort in the person being interviewed. But like so much about interviewing, recognizing these signs is not simply a matter of common sense. An adolescent with a language impairment may have learned to cover his lack of understanding with behaviors that the untrained interviewer would see as evasion, reluctance, dishonesty, or bad attitude. Meanwhile, the interviewer must also be constantly aware of and reflecting on her own behavior. Am I following protocol? Am I consciously or unconsciously inserting content? What is the reaction of the interviewee? Am I encouraging the narrative or am I shutting it down? If so, how? And then the interviewer must adapt. Part 5, the analysis, process, and methods. Section A, the beginning. We started this project with a gut sense that there was more to the interrogations than met the court's eyes or ears. Though we come from different professional backgrounds, our professional interests overlap on the subject of language impairments and their potential for great damage. We both believe that an in-depth speech-language perspective could shed additional light on a tragic situation. The first step, confirming Brendan's language impairment, was easy. Ordinarily, we would have had no access to any diagnosis or test results that occurred outside of the litigation context, and we would not presume to diagnose anybody from a TV show. But in this case, the answer was hidden in plain sight. In the court record, as a special education student, Brendan would have had an individualized education program, IEP, meeting at the beginning of every school year. Those records, including a speech language assessment conducted by the school SLP on September 22nd and September 27, 2005, were admitted into evidence at trial. There was scant mention made of these records, especially the assessment in the case. But as we will discuss below in section 6, the scores and comments left no doubt that Brendan had a severe disability. Meanwhile, we also obtained video or audio records of every interview or interrogation throughout an open records request. We reviewed them for crucial information about nonverbal communication, such as body language, tone of voice, and eye contact. We also reviewed them for inte- intelligibility and significance to the case. Based on these reviews, we chose to have 3 interrogations transcribed. November 5th, 2005, the second interview of February 2007, I'm sorry, the second interview of February 27th, 2006, and March 1st, 2006. Subsection B, transcribing the interviews. The interviews were transcribed verbatim by a trained, experienced transcriber and entered into a computerized language analysis software program, Systematic Analysis of Language Transcriptions Program, also known as SALT. This is a tool that an SLP would ordinarily use to assess a client's communication issues. It is important to note that a language analysis transcription is not like a court transcript. It provides detailed coded information about the verbal and nonverbal conduct of the speakers beyond the words that are spoken. Here, the transcriber followed standard conventions, which included indicating pauses of 2 seconds or more and marking grammatical elements, overlapping speech, word omissions, and errors with code. Prior to transcription, we had observed that Brendan frequently responded non-verbally to police questions. We therefore requested additional coding to capture his gestures. When the process was complete, we were given a fully coded transcription, which we used to generate our quantitative analysis. Subsection C, transcription challenges, law enforcement. The transcriber faced considerable challenges transcribing the interviews, but not because of Brendan. Rather, the difficulty lay with the law enforcement officers Wiegert and Fassbender. Both of them had speech that was rapid, with many run-on sentences and unfinished thoughts, making it difficult to interpret the thoughts expressed. Even though the transcribers are master-level speech-language professionals, they had a hard time determining the boundaries of the police's utterances, where one utterance ends and the next utterance begins, because their utterances were so disorganized. Wiegert and Fassbender's thoughts were expressed unclearly and at times incoherently. Ordinarily, when the transcribers are transcribing an interaction with a child with an impairment and an adult professional, it is the child with language impairment whose language presents the transcriber with the greatest challenge because the child's intelligibility and prosody may be impaired. In this case, however, it was the adult's language that was the problem. Subsection D, post-SALT analysis. After the SALT process was completed, we took a deeper look. We paid particular attention to the February 27th and March 1st interviews, since these immediately preceded the charges. And the March 1st interview was a preliminary evidence against Brendan and the subject of 12 years of litigation. Our analysis first differentiated between true questions and utterances that have grammatical form of questions but do not function as true questions. For example, why don't you have a seat? Is a question functioning as a polite way to tell someone to be seated without expectation of a reply. This type of utterance was not considered a question for our analysis. On the other hand, some utterances function as questions but do not have the grammatical question form. Examples include requests such as, "Tell me more about that." This type was coded as an open-ended question and included in the analysis. True questions were categorized and coded into the following types: open-ended questions, WH questions, multiple choice, and three forms of yes, no questions. As part of this analysis, we retranscribed several passages to allow us to more accurately analyze the confounding nature of Wiegert and Fassbender's language usage. Additionally, we counted other instances where law enforcement used tactics that compromise the integrity of the interview. These include speaking in paragraphs, i.e., four or more sentences or utterances in a turn, and asking three or more questions in rapid succession before giving Brendan an opportunity to answer. Before we began this project, it was obvious from viewing the interrogations that Wiegert and Fassbender's method of communicating with Brendan fell far below professional norms. Just how far below became painfully apparent when we examined our results. Okay, guys, I need to take a, as I call it, T and P break. I'm going to get some tea, take a ladies' room break, and I shall return in just a moment. We'll let you kind of digest everything said before we jump into the severity of his language impairment. All right. We're on section 6, part section about Brendan Dassey, section A. So part 6, section A. This is the severity of his language impairment. As we said earlier, determining whether Brendan had a language impairment and the extent of his disability was the easy part for us. The September 2005 speech language report conducted by an SLP for the Mishcot schools was sitting in the court file, along with other school records from Brendan's 2005 IEP meeting. The test results and the ancillary records were unequivocal. Brendan had profound disabilities, speech, language impairment, and language-based specific learning disability that centered on his I can't say that word very well, communicative language and interconnected cognitive functioning. And those disabilities had been present probably since birth. An individual's language skills are in part evaluated by means of specialized instruments administered and interpreted by an SLP. In Brendan's case, the school SLP used a common assessment tool, the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals, 4th edition, CELF4, SELF4. SELF4 includes a series of subtests which measure a variety of essential communicative functions such as auditory comprehension and recall, ability to follow directions, and comprehension of social rules. SELF4 is more finely tuned to the layers of language than measures traditionally relied on by courts such as verbal IQ or clinical assessments. The report of Brendan's scores is a devastating document. It makes clear that Brendan's overall impairment level was in the most severe range and that at 16, he was functioning like much a younger child. Test results range from 5 years to 8 months to 11 years, 9 months. Stop right there. What they did is they tested Brendan, and he tests out somewhere in different areas. He was like a 5-year-old that's 8 months into his year, or an 11-year-old that's 9 months into his year. So he, at that time, they're questioning sometimes a 5-year-old or an 11-year-old, depending on what question and how we understood it. Back to the read. His total language score placed him at the first percentile, indicating that 99% of kids his age understood and used language better than he did. Most of them much, much better. The chart below, figure 2, shows Brendan's scores on the severity of his impairment. Note, though not the same as an IQ, SELF4 uses the same metrics as an IQ test. 100 is the mean or age average. 85 is one standard deviation below the mean. 70 is 2 standard deviations below the mean. Let's see where Brendan fits. Figure 2, impairment levels for standard scores and percentile rank from Brendan Dassey's language evaluation, SELF4. On the left, we see standard score. Did he score at 116% of his class? No. Did he score at 101 to 115 of his class? No. Did he score at the 86 to 114 range? No. Did he even score at 78 to 85% of his class range? No. Did he score at 70 to 77, moderate to low range, working memory? Brendan's standard score was 75. Brendan's percentile rank was 5. When we look at this one, under the hood, Brendan Dassey, you can see that it's below 70. So anything below 70 is considered severe, very low range. Core language, reception, expression, content, and memory. Brendan Dassey got a 66 core language, his reception a 70, his expression a 63, content 70, and his memory a 58, which is below 1%. The rest are 2% or below. The bell curve below, figure 3, shows Brendan's score in relation to other 16-year-olds with the scores of 95% of 16-year-olds falling between 70 and 130. As you can see here, with Brendan having a 55, how he is not in the hump. The report and the commentary from other school records, the report, edit that out, you guys, just erase it. The report and the commentary from other school records identified difficulties at the most basic level, such as participating in classroom activities, initiating conversation, and asking for clarification when confused. Brendan spoke at a low volume with little variation in pitch, and his body language, such as eye contact and gestures, were minimal. Yet another aspect of communication that he was unable to use. The list of Brendan's strengths, identified by the school SLP, is telling. It was limited to 3 things: intelligible speech, willingness to participate, and knowledge of familiar routines. Stop right there. I'm going to talk to you guys for a minute because I personally have a son that scores almost identical to this, and he has Asperger's. He has the IEP team, and I am personally familiar with these tests. I want to go over these 3 things just a moment so that we don't forget them. Intelligible speech. That only means that what he says, the few words that this child says, can be understood. So he can say yes, no, and some other things. Willingness to participate. In other words, he will participate in an event. He is not pulling back from the event. It's just that's all they're able to do. And knowledge of familiar routines. So structure is something that helps them to maintain their memory. So in the event of an IEP meeting, if the child responds well to structure, they will put things in a routine that follows the same pattern over and over so that the child learns to put their book bag here. This is what you do at this time of the day. Then you're going to eat lunch. The reason these routines, these structured routines are so important is because the child then gains a sense of worth with it. And in the structure of events, it starts promoting them to feel more confident with their disability. And in that same structure, they build in safety nets for these children so that in the event, while they're in perhaps a group setting and it's not working for them, and they feel that they're falling back and they'll panic sometimes and they'll pull in and they'll close off. They can pull out of that. They can go to a safe spot, which is usually it's a special needs teacher that dedicates one-on-one to help that child through that moment and to try to get that child to where they can go back in, because most of the time the child does not understand what the project is entailing. When too many people talk or directions go too many in a row, the child's processing is slower than others. So the rest of the group knows what's going on. They're all excited. They're bouncing all over. This child has not caught up to understand what is being expected of him. He could get overwhelmed and need a reprieve. Okay? Let's jump back in. This is not to say that Brendan had no language or could not communicate at all. He had foundational language skills, but they were grossly underdeveloped. That means he would have trouble processing a lot of talk coming at him in any context. He would fatigue easily and become cognitively overloaded. This would hit him especially hard at school. Brendan would be the kid in the classroom who is always lost, always, quote, not getting it. His low scores on such tests as recalling sentences and understanding spoken paragraph show he would struggle to process and recall even the most common forms of classroom communication, lectures, and multi-step directions. Learning new vocabulary and concepts would be slow and onerous. Brendan's special education teacher took note of defects in verbal memory, which affected all areas of language. Typical high school expectations, such as taking notes, studying for tests, and taking exams, would be beyond his reach without extraordinary assistance. Abstract spoken or written material common at the high school level would increase his comprehension difficulties. This is but a sample of the challenges that Brendan would have faced every day, year after year, during his high school years and beyond. Reports from other teachers bear out the difficulties caused by Brendan's severe language defect. While Brendan was in regular classes for some of his school day pursuant to federal law, this is not because he was capable of doing, quote, regular work. He was hopelessly behind and was at best a passive observer. The effect of Brendan's language impairment on his academic achievement was summarized this way. Brendan continues to demonstrate delays in his basic reading and reading comprehension skills. Brendan demonstrates a delay in classroom achievement in these areas and in information processing defect in the area of manipulation, difficulty summarizing and interpreting information, difficulties interfering information, difficulties understanding multiple contexts. Brendan continues to demonstrate significant delays in his receptive and expressive language skills, memory, vocabulary, sentence comprehension, pragmatics, and areas of abstract language. Brendan's language delays impact him educationally and socially. These types of poor language skills, would also be felt outside of an academic setting. His poor communication would interfere with establishing and maintaining interpersonal relationships. The test scores show that his interactions would be compromised at the most basic levels. Knowing how to participate in conversation, reading others' facial cues, tone of a voice, and body language. His scores on tests of figurative language and interference indicate his understanding of common elements of an adolescent language, such as slang and sarcasm, would be limited, and combined with poor conversational skills would isolate him. By any measure, Brendan's language scores and communication skills are heartbreakingly poor, and the effects would have been staggering. Perhaps the most treacherous observation about Brendan's situation came from a speech language professional in Northern Ireland. When shown the SLP's report, the former head of the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists could only say, "Cricky, this is appalling." Subsection B. What does this mean for interviewing Brendan? Given what we know about Brendan's ability to cope verbally, it seems ludicrous to even contemplate letting him be questioned by law enforcement. Yet Brendan could, in fact, have been effectively interviewed if, and this is a big if, The person or persons doing the interviewing knew what they were doing. Even with his limited language ability, Brendan had enough of the basics to be able to tell his experiences and answer a skilled interviewer's questions to fill in gaps in his narratives. However, Brendan's language profile combined with his age means that an interviewer would have to adhere to a rigorous protocol that protects against contamination, confusion, and intimidation. Moreover, even with well intended, well trained interviews, Brendan could not be left alone. In any interview that deviated from protocol, however, we expect that Brendan would be defenseless, especially if the interview is in reality a high pressure investigation. Just as at school, he would be overwhelmed by too much verbiage. There would be much he would miss. He would constantly struggle to grasp what is being thrown at him, and he would quickly become cognitively overloaded. He could easily misread interrogators' verbal and nonverbal signals. As the records show, he would not ask for clarification if he did not understand. Neither would he argue. Ultimately, in an exhausted act of self preservation, he would be expected to simply go along. Subsection C. Why didn't anybody see this? A brief perusal of Brendan's school record makes it abundantly clear that his severe language deficiencies are a central part of who he is and how he operates. How is it then that the words language impairment were never uttered? How is it that Brendan's communication difficulties by any name barely received any mention at all during the pretrial or trial process? As noted in the evaluation, Brendan's speech was unintelligible, i.e., did not draw attention to itself. And as the videos show, he could speak incomplete through short sentences. On several occasions, he strung short sentences together. He nodded repeatedly and did not admit to confusion. Without examining these behaviors further, i.e., through the lens of language defect, some observers might and did mistakenly believe he could function competently in an interview situation. And Brendan, like so many other impaired adolescents, would have developed strategies. Forgive me, I'm going to cough. Sorry, guys, I'm going to mute. To hide his disability and avoid negative social evaluations. Depending on an individual, this can take a variety of forms. By all accounts, Brendan's strategies appear to involve extreme compliance, agreeing to just about anything, trying to do whatever the person in authority wanted, pretending to understand, and rarely asking questions for clarification. Finally, we must return to the fact that most of the legal profession, just like most of the general public, has never heard of language impairments and does not know what they look or sound like, which might be marginally acceptable if the legal profession did not, as happened throughout this case, fill in the blanks with its own worldview. This case record, along with the show itself, is replete with judges and lawyers making assumptions about Brendan's intentions and abilities, and those assumptions were wrong. For example, while it is true that Brendan answered questions and spoke intelligibly in complete subject, verb, object sentences, those skills are not signs of verbal sophistication. These are language development milestones achieved between the ages of 4 and 6. And no, Brendan did not show, quote, signs of physical distress while seated on a comfortable couch during the investigation. He did not yell, swear, stomp out, or refuse to answer questions. He maintained a consistent flat effect and slumped posture throughout. But if anybody had read through his school records and perhaps asked a few questions, they would have known that these were hardly signs that he was not intimidated. It is more likely that he was trying to hide. Subsection 7, Part 7, the interview, assessment and analysis. When this project began, we thought most of this story would be about Brendan and his language impairment. However, his serious limitations would make it difficult for him to express himself in an interview, and how his poor comprehension will make it difficult to understand much of what Uyghur and Fassbender said and asked him, and the potential consequences of anything he said. What we did not appreciate was a powerful force that would be exerted by Uyghur and Fassbender's own language and language usage. Although there is no perfect interview, even with rigorous training and review, the police in this case could hardly be further from best practice or even acceptable practice. Even without the additional language and language impairment layers we are describing here, this interrogation is widely considered a textbook example of, quote, what not to do in interrogations involving juveniles and individuals with intellectual impairments. When we add in the language piece, this interview becomes an abomination. Section A. Before the interview. The stage was set for law enforcement malpractice long before the interview ever began, starting with investigator training. Proficiency as an interviewer is not acquired from several training seminars or even from a week-long session. It is an intense and ongoing process. Yet, the chief investigator and interrogator, Mark Uyghur, testified that his training only consisted of a controversial read technique seminar, which lasted 1, 3, or 4 days, plus several other one-day seminars. After that, he relied on his own experience. By any measure, this is hopelessly inadequate, not to mention dangerous. Even more alarming is the fact that Uyghur claimed to have developed his own hybrid technique. He proudly testified, after you've done interviews for several years, you kind of develop your own style, I think, and you incorporate some things from different training that you attend. Uyghur and Fassbender approached this particular interview with a similar lack of rigor and standards. The correct practice for any high-stakes interview begins with preparation, which among other things requires that the interviewers learn about the person to be interviewed. That did not happen here, nor did Uyghur even believe that preparation was important. Uyghur and Fassbender knew almost nothing about Brendan when they questioned him for hours on February 27th and March 1st. Then, at some point when Uyghur and Fassbender did obtain information, it was wrong. At trial, Uyghur testified that it never occurred to him that Brendan might have some cognitive limitations. He did not know he was in special education, and he did not believe that Brendan was impaired in any way. He was a mainstream student at Mishkat High School. He was in driver's ed. He could answer questions. He could understand. Subsection B. Who did the talking? Whether in a clinical or forensic setting, the person questioning an adolescent with a language impairment should sit back and let the interviewee do the talking as much as possible. In this interview, the questionnaires did anything but. There was a remarkable disparity in the amount of talking done by the police and Brendan. And although Brendan was the informant, the police spoke more than twice as much, 2.5 times. The police used a total of 18,325 words in the two interviews we focused on, while Brendan used 6,998, making his contribution a mere 28% of the total interview. These numbers alone, figure 4, tell us that this interview was utterly inappropriate for Brendan. Figure 4, number of words spoken. As you can see, Brendan is in the lighter color. Fassbender and Uyghur are the darker colors. Subsection C, the number of questions. One of the simplest counts was the number of questions put to Brendan. The total for the 2 interviews was an astonishing 1,525. February 286, March 1,239 questions. They asked questions at startlingly rapid rate, an average of 6.68 questions per minute, or one question every 9 to 10 seconds. As we saw over and over again with all our data, these high numbers, shocking as they are just the beginning of the story. Okay, guys, we're going to finish this page, and then we're going to stop the live, and we're going to restart a live at 2 o'clock and finish it, just because it's running a little bit long, and everybody probably needs an intermission. We will do the complete read, but it's going to be broken into 2 parts. We're on page 43 of 76. We have this last paragraph. I will stop in just to say a quick hi. And then there will be about a 15-minute pause where everybody can go eat some lunch or whatever you need to do. And then we'll jump back on live and we'll continue from there. Subsection D, question types. The questions were rarely simple, standalone affairs. Wiegert and Fassbender sometimes used a series of questions without pausing, or rephrased or recycled questions when Brenton answered no. They mixed question types, beginning with an open-ended question, and without pausing, posed questions that suggested the content they wanted, and then asking him about the information they put into their own questions. We were, however, ultimately able to sort the questions well enough to classify them by type. See Figure 5. Almost all of Wiegert and Fassbender's questions, 98%, were question types containing high amounts of content. Yes, no, law, and multiple choice setting up maximal conditions for contamination, confusion, and, for someone like Brendan, intimidation. With these high numbers, it is clear that it was the questions themselves, not Brendan's answers, that were the main vehicles for introducing huge amounts of content into the interview. And here is the figure, you guys. Proportion of question type by interview. We get the what questions and we get the multiple choice questions far exceeding the yes/no questions. So we'll come back after we do this. We'll jump over real quick to the live. And this will give everybody a chance to kind of catch their breath. This is a long process, but this is big. This is so, so important. I do want to grab a couple of the comments here. We're halfway. If you have questions, please do state them. I'm going to kind of scroll backwards a little bit through the questions to make some comments. Daisy Lady says, oh my God, I just realized something. One of my brother-in-laws is well known in the Wisconsin education community. He was a superintendent of schools in Brookfield, Wisconsin for years and knows Tony Evers. Daisy Lady, our new governor, Tony Evers, was the Wisconsin superintendent of schools in charge of the entire Wisconsin school system. For this reason, I'm sure he would be very interested in Brendan. That is probably the most brilliant thing I've heard all day, my dear. We need to really seriously dig into this, you guys. Let's send a copy of this. I want us to tweet massively this document to all those that we can. Let's tag as many people from Tony Evers to Zellner to anybody that we can call attention to on Brendan in hopes that we can get people to read this. You just never know, you guys. Okay. Jeannie says he had 0 chances. He just wanted to go back to school. Yeah. Deborah says, turns my stomach. He had no damn idea what he was saying. He just wanted to go home. Yeah. Yeah. They still, to this day, don't know a great deal of Asperger's is so individualized in the responses. However, it has its own symptoms, I guess, or you can pin it a little bit. You can name this person, you can tell is off. They're not comprehending what you're saying. Like Some examples would be that my son, like I think I've told you guys this before, we went to a table where we saw lost and found, and I found his coat in it. He didn't remember it was his coat. I'm like, Noah, you've worn this all year long. This is your winter coat. Look, it has your name in it. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mom. He put his coat on. He said, but are we going to get in trouble for taking it? I said, no, this is a lost and found. Now he's in eighth grade and I'm having this conversation. He has Asperger's. He's like a 7-year old. I said, no, this table is where if they find something, they put it here and it's kind of finders keepers in a sense. It just needs to be yours. You're not reading a book how to answer all the questions. You do your best as a parent. Well, a week later I got a call from the school and Noah was in trouble in the office and he was sitting in a little girl's pink coat. And they're like, he won't give the coat up. And I said, Noah, where did you get the coat? I found it. I said, okay. I need you to take it off. It's not yours. But I found it, and you said it's finders keepers, and I couldn't find my coat, so somebody else probably has that, and now it's theirs. Uh huh. See where the disconnect is, you guys? It's a communication issue. They try to please you, so I had to explain it to him. But Noah, if there's a previous owner, if somebody already owned the coat, like your coat, it's still theirs. So you have to take off the coat and give it back to them so that they can give it to that person. And then mama will help you find your coat. Okay. He took the coat off and we left. But they wouldn't take the time because the IEP team was busy at lunch and it was just the receptionist at the desk and the janitor was demanding, give us the coat, it's not yours. And he's saying, but I found it, it's mine. You see? So it can get complicated and complex. All right. Um, Daisy does a follow up. RD, I will present all this to Jim by tomorrow night and see if he would present it to Tony Evers personally. Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, this live may have just see Jax, she puts the stuff out there for us in the sense that she makes a platform. Jax West has been in this case. She has the same common goal as all of us that are working to get these men that are wrongfully convicted home. And so she puts a platform out there. I need somebody, please tell me who posted this in Jax's room so that we can give them a personal thank you and leave some thank yous down in the description. We do not know who personally put this on our website that we go to on Jax's Ma'am Gossip. We're part of her group, and one of our researchers found it. Oh, that would be great, Daisy. Okay, guys, we're going to take about let's go ahead and give it 10 minutes. Everybody go 10 or 15, give or take. Let's get something to eat. Let's get back into this. And we're going to close this live completely down. Daisy, Jax West runs several Facebook groups. And she's had one of her groups, the longest that's in the Steve Avery case, which is the Stephen Avery Project. And then she also runs Ma'am Gossip, where you can talk theories. I'll see you guys in about 10, 15 minutes, give or take a few, just a little intermission, and we will restart up right where we left off. Okay? Thank you all, and I hope to see you back soon.